What if the third worst nuclear disaster in history was completely hidden from the world? Today, we uncover the secrets of the Kyshtym Disaster, 1957. In the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, 1957, a secret nuclear facility called Mayak was quietly producing plutonium. The world had no idea what was happening here. Inside, workers handled radioactive waste in conditions that today would be unimaginable. Safety protocols were ignored, alarms were silenced, and records were hidden. On September 29, 1957, the unimaginable happened. A storage tank containing highly radioactive waste exploded. The blast was massive. It released hundreds of tons of radioactive material into the surrounding environment. Villages nearby were contaminated instantly, forests burned with invisible poison, and people who lived nearby had no idea they were in danger. The Soviet government covered it up completely. No evacuation orders were given. People continued their lives, unknowingly absorbing lethal doses of radiation. Animals died mysteriously, crops withered, and entire regions became uninhabitable. The disaster was so severe that it became known only decades later. This wasn't a fictional story. It wasn't a small leak. It was the third largest nuclear disaster in history after Chernobyl and Fukushima, and yet most of the world has never heard of it. The workers at Mayak were left to clean up the mess without protective gear. Many fell ill. Some would die within years. The lessons of Kyshtym were buried along with the records, a silent warning about what happens when secrecy outweighs safety. And in the shadows of the Soviet Union, the Kyshtym disaster waited decades before anyone would speak its name aloud. After the explosion at Mayak, the radioactive cloud spread silently over the surrounding villages and forests. People went about their lives, completely unaware that invisible poison was drifting through the air. Children played outside, farmers worked in the fields, families ate contaminated food, animals began dying mysteriously, cows stopped producing milk, dogs and cats disappeared from the streets. The river, a source of water for several villages, became tainted. People started feeling unwell, complaining of headaches, nausea, and dizziness, but the cause was unknown. Doctors were powerless. There were no warnings. Meanwhile, inside the Mayak facility, engineers and workers scrambled to contain the disaster. They wore barely any protective clothing, their faces often covered only with cloths, and handled radioactive waste directly. Many fell ill within days, their skin burning, hair falling out, their immune systems failing. Some would never fully recover. The Soviet government immediately classified the accident as a state secret. The local population was misled. People were told the accident was minor and that everything was under control. Evacuation orders were delayed, sometimes for weeks. Villagers were forced to leave only after contamination levels became dangerously high, and many never returned to their homes. Entire forests became dead zones. Animals, crops, and soil remained radioactive for decades. Rivers glowed faintly with contamination. The scale of destruction was staggering, yet it remained unknown to the world outside the Soviet Union. No journalists, no international aid, only silence and secrecy. Kyshtym became a hidden lesson in how bureaucracy, secrecy, and human error can combine to create one of history's most catastrophic disasters. and it took decades before scientists could measure the true impact of the radioactive contamination. By the end of 1957, thousands of people had been exposed to dangerous radiation, many unknowingly. The environment was poisoned, and the world still had no idea that the third largest nuclear disaster had just occurred, quietly, hidden, and forgotten. As the radioactive contamination continued to spread, Soviet authorities realized that the situation could no longer be ignored. But admitting the disaster to the public was unthinkable. The Cold War demanded secrecy. Instead, they initiated what would become one of the most carefully hidden cleanup operations in history. Military units were dispatched to the contaminated zones. Villagers were ordered to evacuate their homes, sometimes with only hours' notice. Many left behind everything they owned, believing they would return shortly. But the radiation had permanently poisoned the land. Fields, forests, and rivers were now unsafe for generations. Inside the Mayak facility, the engineers worked feverishly to repair the damaged storage tanks and contain further leaks. Protective measures were minimal. Workers suffered acute radiation sickness, and some died quietly, without recognition or medical assistance. Records of their suffering were erased or never documented. Meanwhile, the Soviet press remained silent. Outside the country, no one knew of the disaster. International agencies were unaware, and the villagers, now displaced, had no choice but to comply, living in temporary settlements without understanding the long-term risks. Years later, scientists studying the region discovered that radioactive isotopes had contaminated a vast swath of the Ural Mountains. Whole ecosystems were altered. Forests and rivers remained unsafe, and genetic mutations appeared in animals for decades. The full human cost was never fully disclosed. Kyshtym was a disaster born not only of technical failure, but also of secrecy, mismanagement, and the chilling efficiency of a government determined to hide its mistakes. And yet it stands today as a silent warning. Technological progress without transparency can have consequences far worse than anyone imagined. Decades passed before the true scale of the Kyshtym disaster became known. Hidden deep in Soviet archives, the information slowly surfaced. Scientists studying the Ural Mountains found entire forests and rivers contaminated with radioactive isotopes. Wildlife showed mutations. Some species disappeared entirely from the affected area. For the human population, the consequences were severe. Many villagers exposed to radiation developed cancers, genetic anomalies, and chronic illnesses. Families lost generations of health and well-being. And yet, because the Soviet government had silenced all public discussion, the world remained unaware of the disaster for decades. Mayak continued operations, slowly modernizing safety protocols, but the memory of 1957 lingered like a shadow. The disaster became a cautionary tale, not in the textbooks, not in the news, but in the hidden history of nuclear technology. Kyshtym stands as a stark reminder. When secrecy and bureaucracy override human safety, the results can be catastrophic. It was a disaster caused not only by human error, but by the deliberate concealment of truth. Today, we look back and ask, how many other secrets remain hidden? How many disasters never reach our awareness? The story of Kyshtym is a warning, a silent echo from the past that still resonates today. The lesson is clear. Transparency, accountability, and respect for human life must always come before the desire to hide mistakes. And history, if we listen carefully, teaches us this lesson, even from the quietest corners of the world. Call to action for narration. If this story shocked you, subscribe to Echoes of History. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and help spread awareness of hidden historical events that change the world. Thank you for watching. If this story shocked you, subscribe to Echoes of History, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video to make sure hidden history is never forgotten.